As far as being interested in photography, I learned from my father. I was born in Buffalo, but was only there about 6 months, and then the family moved to the western part of North Carolina to an apple orchard. And so after school, I had to pick apples and so on and contribute to the family's finances. But my father, after graduating from college in Cornell, he was a draftsman engineer, and he was involved in building dams. And so I found some of his old pictures. He had a trunk in the basement, and I would open it ever so often and just go in there and look around. And I saw some of the pictures he had made. And he made one very creative one because he didn't have panorama cameras and things back then. So what he did is he sliced this thing and made like a pie and glued it all together, and it gave the picture of the dam. And I thought, that's a neat idea. So I had a little brownie camera like this, and I would take pictures and then send it off and come back, and I had them to share with people. I took pictures of the house. I took pictures of him in the garden. I took pictures of the apple trees blooming and the beehives and just anything that was involved. And then when I went off to college, I majored in economics and history and things like in education. And then after teaching, I went in after college. I went to work at 3 different private schools. And at the first one, the Foreman School in Connecticut, I learned how to use the darkroom because I was helping with the yearbook. And so I had to learn how to do that. And so as a result of that, I became very good at it. And so when I went to the next school, which was called the Knox School on Long Island, I taught photography there as well as social studies, and I had the bookstore again there. And then the last one was Perkiomen School in Pennsylvania. And that's where I taught 5 periods a day, ran the bookstore, was a house parent, and sometimes helped with sports like the skiing in the wintertime. And to keep the skiers all straight, I bought them all a certain hat so I could see it on the slope as they came down, and a walkie-talkie and so on, because they were involved in some races and competitions with other schools. So then when I retired, I said, about time to retire. So I said, well, I had done some RVing out west because I like to visit ghost towns. And I've been doing that for a number of years. And so I said, well, I think either Arizona or New Mexico. And I looked, and Arizona was a little lower in altitude, so I said, well, less snow. And New Mexico looked higher with snow. So I just did some research and looked at maps and so on. And then one time I saw something on Facebook about this realtor in Green Valley. And I looked where Green Valley was. I said, this is interesting. So I called her, and she told me sent me a thing all about Green Valley, with the things with the property is associated with the Green Valley. Then you can join the clubs, and she mentioned all the clubs and the dues and things about that. And that really took hold with me because I could have nice weather, I'd have a western scene, I'd have the camera club. So I had several things out here to look forward to when I moved out. So as soon as I moved out, I bought the house ahead of time because I came out spring break, and I bought the house, and I brought a trailer load with some furniture, not much. I bought most of the stuff when I moved out here because what I had would not go out here. I joined the club, and I went over. It was located at East Center by the pool, just one big room, all dark, no windows in it or anything like that. And so when I knocked on the door, they had already started the program, and they were showing individuals' pictures. You know, they used to, I called it show and tell, but they would put up someone's pictures, either a photograph or later on they went to digital, and people would comment on it, and they could ask the photographer, how did you take it? You know, where is it located? What, you know, what settings did you have on your camera? Those kinds of things. So I learned a lot about where places and things were here in Green Valley, in the area. And so at one of the meetings, a lady said she didn't want to do the field trips anymore, and I said, well, you know, I'll try, and I thought to myself, it'll give me a way to focus on the area, and I will learn things, and then I can share them, because I always like to share things. I guess I learned that through education. And so what I first did is I went to my iPhone, and I went in and put into Google interesting things in Arizona, and sometimes they would list 30 different things. And so I would go in and pick ones I thought would be interesting, because I wanted to base it where the people that took the classes and the courses and the workshops could practice what they heard there and saw there, and when they're taking pictures in the field. And so that's how I started really developing these things. And the one that hit the most was windows and doors, because it was a way for me to look for these things in certain sections of Tucson there. And I stayed really on the south side, and because it's a long way if you have to travel all the way up to, you know, where the malls are and things like that. But they have sections up there too. So what I did is I went around and I made stops, and I would start here and go there, and then I would reverse things until I came up with a nice plan. So then I offered it, and I'm telling you, people, once they had taken a trip or heard about it, it just spread like wildfire. In fact, sometimes I was giving that trip 5 times a season, and a season was usually about 5 months. I started, you know, in May or June. Was when I ended, and I started maybe in February or something, you know, when the weather wasn't real cold and snowy and so on. And they just took to this like anything. I had to limit it to 25 people, so I couldn't keep up with all of them myself, you know. So, and word spread, and people were just, and I said, I'll offer it as many times as I can. So then one time something happened, and I had another field trip booked at the same time. So I gave that to somebody else, and I did an afternoon one. That way the lighting was different, and I didn't have to worry about lunch or anything, and so they loved that too. And then an older man, Don Spear, had started the 10-week course, and he'd had it for several years, and I took it, and he gave you a little book with it and so on, and there were 10 weeks, and he had it set so that you could either meet like on a Wednesday afternoon, a Thursday morning, or a Saturday morning. And this gave the other members time to join and continue on with the hiking club, with the pottery, with the other activities they were involved in.
So in Don's class, what was he teaching?
He was teaching
fundamentals of photography?
Yes.
So he wasn't doing event trips like
No, he was not doing any trips. Okay. No.
So is this sort of how the SIGs really started to come about?
And then I decided that, you know, if nobody wanted to do field trips, I felt it was important, so I did it. And that's how I started out, and I developed it. And as I say, from going on to Facebook and through the internet, I found all these places, and I would list them down, and then I would go and explore each one and say, you know, would it be good? And that's how I found out about the monastery up in Florence. Who would think a monastery in Arizona? But it's a booming one, and it was only started about in 95, and they've got 5 big churches there, and about 100 acres they've developed. and it's just a beautiful architectural study, and so on. And I got permission to go. You have to dress a certain way, nothing flashy, and no parts of your skin showing. Ladies had to wear pants and things like that. So I got that all settled with them. And if I don't have I can't find a picture of them, but I had them pose, and they looked like people out of Europe somewhere with the kerchiefs on and everything, the group shot, because I always took a group shot, and I made it available to the people that went, and I made a copy and I put it in the glass case outside the camera club. If somebody wanted a copy, I said, "What's your email?" and I would email it to them, and so forth. So, and then I put a copy in a book we had in the club, and a binder, and had all these field trips in it, group shots, and so I kept developing new ones, and each year I'd keep some of the old ones and I'd add some new ones. And I did all kinds of things. I even there's a place, it's not well known, where they make the mirror for the telescopes up on mountains to watch, the stars and so on. And we went there, but after one trip, that was enough, because they took us in, gave us a lecture, and of course the lecture was kind of, dead with all kinds of stuff, technical stuff. And then we went in and we watched this thing spin around, and it spins day and night making the mirror. Well, if something happens and it cracks, you have to start again. So, they told us all about that and so on. And I went once, and that was enough. But then all of a sudden I heard about White Stallion Ranch. So I went there and talked to them, and they said, yes, you can come. And they said, we'd like you to come at a certain time, which is after their their guests had eaten lunch, and we ate the same meal, but just with us in the room, and not everybody, not their people. And then we could walk around and take pictures and do things there, because it's a nice atmosphere. And then after a couple of years, the lady said, I think you might be interested if we put them on a wagon sitting on bales of hay and take them up a couple miles into the ranch, and we can have a cookout there. I said, gotcha. So we did that for a couple of times. And then I found Kokoroki Ranch, which nobody's ever heard of, but it dates back to almost the Spanish grants of land around. And what happened is that this guy sort of is the caretaker, and he rents the place out. It can be used for corporate events and so on, but they have to bring all the stock in and so on. I said, that's too much to deal with. So he said, okay, we can take you up to the petroglyphs, about 5 miles up to the original ranch house. And we could go in it, and we saw the beds and the curtains and the shoes there by the bed, everything just like somebody walked out and left the place. I mean, it was also neat, and you could climb all over the petroglyphs and so on. And then I had a catered lunch. And he said, what would you like to have? I said, well, what do you normally have? He said, well, you get 2 drinks, and a salad, and an entree or 2, depending on what you want, and dessert. And I said, well, what's the drinks? And he said, we're introducing something new, which is called cactus tea. I said, gonna have it. And it turns out to be, it's made from the cactus that has the big pads with the little flowers on it. And then we had water. And so they just loved that cactus tea. And I had deep dish apple pie, and they fought over that. They ate everything that was there. They cleaned out the whole containers and so on. So that we did a couple of times over the years. And then there were just other things that got suggested, or I came along with them. I have a list. I'll just read a couple of things to show you. I went to Mexico 2 different times, and I limited to a smaller group. We we rented 2 vans, and I went to Carbulca and Alamos, 2 different places.
Was this a day trip?
No,
Oh,
this
you guys spent
is 3 days. No, 4 days, 3 nights.
Oh, wow. So it's the first time you did anything like that in the club where you actually went and...
Yes. In my RV, I went down there first and scoped out the place. And I told them, I said, there's not a motel that would take everybody, but there's a lot of B&Bs there. And so I made a list of them. And I said, now you contact the B&B and you decide which one you want to have. So I had the van so that I could collect people and take them to certain places and leave them and come back and pick them up and so on. So I had all kinds of things. I had a leather factory down there I took them to, and the leather factory was just a little hole in the wall, but they made all kinds of things for movie stars and important people in the world. And if somebody wanted some yellow leather to match their boots they already had, they would dye it and make it for them and things like that. And they also had little copper boxes that they made from the copper in town and so on. So I said, well, I'm going to make a little trip out of this and make them look for certain things. And
So like a scavenger hunt?
yes, exactly.
Really?
And then I would give them a little leather pouch or a little copper box. And I said, now it's located right in this area here, and it's got an archway in it. And, they'd run around and take pictures, and then they'd come back and show me. And I said, yes, yes, yes. And the person that really had the best of that shot got a gift. So I had several things planned. And then also I found that there was an organization which helped the kids go to school, because basically there weren't public schools there, and if they didn't go to some kind of school, they didn't get any kind of education. And so what they did is they gave house tours, and they used the money to buy uniforms so the kids could go to school and be dressed alike, not some in rags and some others, in collared shirts and so on. And so I did that a couple of times. And that was a way to get in some of these houses which the normal person could not get into. So, I just extended everything a little bit and tweaked it and came up with a lot of different things. And then, of course, in Tucson itself, it's a town of murals. They've got over 100 murals. And so I'd get a section of town and do that. And then I took Linda Gregory with me one day because she got interested in these. And we would drive around and see if we could put together a little place, because you have to drive and park, and parking sometimes was an issue. So we did that. And I also went to the boot factory down in Nogales where they make boots. And we had a tour and we saw them from the leather to making the boot to everything. And you could buy things there. Some were already pre-arranged there, or you could be measured and in 6 to 8 weeks come back and have a fitting and get your own boots that way.
So how long did you run SIGs? How many years did you do that?
Well, I don't know. It went on for a number of years, let's put it that way. I more went, after a while, it was just strictly these field trips, because that was keeping me busy. And another one I went to, and I sent you a picture of it, and you'll see it's a tail of an airplane, and people standing in front of it. That's at Philip Baum's glass factory, where they hand blew glass, and we got to sit in the room and watch them blow the glass, and then we got a discount if we wanted to buy things. And of course some of the things were very expensive, but also they had some little things you could buy, ornaments for your Christmas tree and things of that nature. And then I went to Picture Rock, and there's a couple that runs a little sort of a farm out there where they have chickens that have feathers up and down their legs, and they have donkeys and all kinds of things. And so we went out there and had a picnic lunch and visited with them as well. And let's see where else. Oh, I even took a trip to Monument Valley. And this was one where you could take your RV or you could stay in the motel. So I had RV sites reserved for those that had an RV, and the others could stay in one of the motels there. And then you have to take a native person to give the tours, and they put you in these old cars or jeeps, and they run up and down through the water and around here and up and down and give you a nice tour of Monument Valley. And so I did that, and then also I had another one where it was more modern. We were all in vans, and they took us to a different area of Monument Valley, and we could see that as well. And then one of the favorite places was Gammon's Gulch. It's a western town. A man, James Gammon, spent his lifetime creating this 10-acre plot of buildings. Some of them are old that were moved to there. Some were created there. It was used for movies, and sometimes the movie set would want a nice saloon, so they built a saloon, and it stayed there. So gradually the town got larger and larger, and Jay and his wife ran it for a number of years. He has passed on, and the place is now for sale for $900,000 if you have some chunk change for that. But that was all good there. And sometimes I would hire actors from Tucson or Tombstone or anywhere around, dressed in costume, and they would have gunfights on the streets.
And you would do this?
Yes.
Wow.
And this would give people a chance to, get around here, and the people would show them your weapons. And one of the guys showed me his gun, and that thing was so very, very heavy. And he said, "This is a replica." He said, "So the real gun took a lot of muscle to get up there and fire and move around and carry this thing on you, And so they learned a lot about that, and also some gun safety things. And then when we did some of the boroughs in Tucson, I took them to a restaurant where it's very famous. Food is there and all kinds of things.
What's the name? Do you remember the name?
It's called the Barrio Beverage, it's called. And they used to make, I don't know if they do anymore or not, but they used to make their own beer, and they put it in cans like Coke and so on. And you could buy a 6-pack of beer there. And they had all, tables and lots of things around unusual. And I would always take them there. And you could get a nice meal and, a nice plate of things. And they were always, the menu was designed with Western themes. We didn't call it just a hamburger. They might call it a wagon chuck burger or something, and give it a fancy name for that. I'm trying to think what else I did.
Well, how long did you run the field trips? Do you remember how many years that was?
I did it probably 10, 12 years at least,
so
yes.
Probably up to 2015.
Oh, yeah. And because I felt, it was good. And when I did the 10-week, I took that over after Don Spears left, and I had a theme each year.
So you took over after Don left.
Yeah. So Don was still around, but he was getting on in years, and he did want to drive too much or get involved, and he stuck mostly to technical things and things around the club. So I created this, continued it, I should say, and I made a binder each year, and I had 10 lectures in it. And how I developed these lectures is I would find somebody been in the club for a while or had been experienced, and I would go to them and say, now, Tom, what are you taking pictures of now? Or what do you like to take pictures of now? He said, I like to look at them and divide them so that I have the right amount of space for the sky, the image itself, and the foreground. So then I asked him, and he wrote up a program for that. So that became one of the 10 weeks there. And I'd go to somebody else who taught matting classes. And I said, okay. And so then he put a section in about matting. And then if the people wanted matting, they could make an appointment with him later on. And he would take them into the matting room, 2 or 3 at a time. And they would cut mats for the pictures they had printed and taken on other trips and so on. And then one year I had the eyes habit, where you focused on eyes, whether it was animals or people or whatever. And some guy liked that idea because he'd been taking a lot of bird pictures. So he wrote an article that I could use for that one. So this is how I developed it. And each year I repeated some of them, but then I added another 2 or 3 to the list. So after 10 years, I had covered so many things. And what was funny at the luncheon the other day is this gentleman sort of took over the field trips, he and his wife. She's the president of the club. And then afterwards he came to my table and he was saying, oh, this would have been a good one. But Karl has already given it. I said, well, most of the things I have done. So, I mean, it doesn't matter, because you can look at it differently. And, of course, there's some bird things. I was not into birds, and a lot of people weren't. So now, because the only thing people would go to the crane thing, but that's a long drive to watch the cranes. And when they took off in the morning, you didn't know at what time they were actually going to leave and what time they were going to come back. So the rest of the time was a waste, for a long drive to get there. So I just tried to create what I could and provide, something that people could take home with them and remember the experience. And one time I found the first gas station in Tucson. And I just found it when I was driving around planning something. And it didn't have a particular brand of gas, but it was just a little thing. And it had one bay to drive into to get anything fixed. And it had the pumps outside. And they were taken down to protect them because people were throwing rocks at the globes and so on. So they were inside the building. So I found out who owned it, and I asked them, to tell me something about it. So whenever I was in a certain area there, I would just circle by there and say, hey, a little something for you is this, And so they jump out of their car and take pictures, and so forth. And so this is how I just, evolved into things. And then, of course, they used to have a house tour that you could pay money for. And so somebody said, I'll treat you to a house tour. So they did. And so I wrote down some of the addresses. And then afterwards, I included those in my windows and doors because there were different places I hadn't been to. So this is how things just evolved into to what was there.
So it sounds like you carried through your beginnings as an educator and in that whole sphere of education all the way through your years where you're very active in the club. So tell me how important that is to you.
Well, it was very satisfying in that I could share what I had learned with others. And hopefully they would share with somebody else. And there was a lot of time I used to have directions for the windows and doors, and people would ask me for them because, I got my sister's coming to town and her family, and I want to take them to see some of those places. Or I've lived here for 40 years and I've never seen these things before. And, and so they wanted to go back and revisit them. And from time to time they would change. Sometimes the colors would change. Sometimes the whole thing would be, reconstructed. And there was one famous one I always took them down. It was this door, and it had 13 locks on it. One door. And I said, I think they have a vandalism problem in the area. And they all looked and took a picture of it. Well, one time when I went by, the door had been replaced, so I didn't say anything. And then a few years later, I saw that they'd put the knobs back on because somebody in the community probably said, well, it's a good thing, to have that because it draws people to our area. And one guy kept seeing me go by every so often, and he had a little dog. He called it, it was a motorcycle named Harley. And he saw me go by, and he said, what are you guys out doing? And I told him. He says, well, come on here. So we went through his house to his backyard, and we were able to see that. He was a very crafty guy, and sold some of his things and made some jewelry and things like that. So it gave him exposure as well. So just things opened up. And another house we went by, the lady said, oh, let me move the car, because it was a white Mercedes, and it was right in front of an apple green door, and it had a maroon frame around it, and I wanted to take that. And she said, oh, let me move it. And she asked about us, and she said, oh, come on in. Honey, they're coming in. So she opened the door, but everything in the house was white, even a white cat laying on a white comforter on the white bed. And so, but at least we got the doors. And so things just went that way. It just continued on.
So looking at the club at how it is today now, and I mean, field trips out there, event trips going out there, I mean, it takes up a considerable amount of what the club has to offer, besides the individual things. But so how do you feel that the direction has gone today? And
well, with times, everything has changed. Like with COVID, a lot of things changed and so forth. I'm still very proud of the club, and I don't do much with, technically I can't join, but they gave me, grandfathered in that I can, taking the field trips, but some of them I can't with the walker. It's just not feasible. And but I still do contribute and go to some of their evening events and things of that nature.
Well, you created this whole environment for the club, and it's been very, very successful.
Oh, yes.
So you must be pretty proud of that.
Oh, that is one of the things I'm proudest of. Yeah. And then another thing was I got tied in with Canon cameras. They had a speaking series that they would provide speakers once a year to come to your club if you were a large club. And there were two of us, I think our club and one in Phoenix, and they would provide speakers for them. And I had 5 years of them. And the first one, they gave you a list and you go through, and some of them specialized in car racing, some in weddings, some in, nature and this type of thing. So I'd go through and pick out a couple, and I'd write to my representative, the lady, and I would say, I'm interested in these people. And she would say, well, this one can't come because they've been in Arizona recently, because they didn't want their people to stay only in one state, And it got too expensive after a while, so they discontinued it. But I got some the first one I got, I could not believe, was David Hune Kennerly, who took pictures in the White House for several presidents. And he came just walked in his normal clothes, didn't say anything. And I knew who he was, so I went up and talked to him. And then he sat down, and then I introduced him. And I said a couple of things, and I could hear people, where did he get that guy? And afterwards it came up, and I said, well, I just know certain people, that know certain people. And he told things about a president's wife that wanted to dance, and so she danced on the table in the cabinet room, and he took a picture of her dancing. And just all kinds of things. And he told stories and so on. And then the next guy I got was Benson was his last name. And he was English. And he had taken pictures of Elizabeth Taylor when she had cancer and had her head shaved. And he was the only one that was allowed to do it, because he did it in a way not to, really push that issue, but he took it gently, so it showed her and the character that she had in her face and her head, the way it was turned and so on. And he also took the Beatles when they came over here. And so he had lots of stories to tell too. And then I got another guy who was very interesting. He lived in Colorado, and he specialized in taking pictures in that area. And his studio was an old store, in the back alleys, and that's where he had his business. And what he did is he went out and took pictures of these farmers, either gathering hay, it could be riding a tractor, or they could be riding, hay wagon or something, very old equipment and so on. And what he did is he made a large picture up of one of the scenes of them in it, and he gave it to them, like that on the wall that I have there. And he gave it to them. And that really meant so much to them, because no one had ever bothered to take a picture of them. And they were out there normally doing their work year after year. Some of these families had had this farm, for years, several generations. And so he told us about how that got him in the door with things. And I turned around and I looked, and one of our club members was teary-eyed. And so afterwards I said, "John, what happened?" He said, "I know that guy. And he took pictures of my grandfather, because he'd been out in that area for years, and the farm had turned over several generations, And he said the farm has been sold. He said, but the idea that this guy knew, and he took pictures of people that I knew, because in the summertime I would go out and stay with my grandfather, and so he was out there for a couple of months, and the farming was still going on, and so he was really touched by that. And I just thought, how all these things, just come together, and I didn't worry about what people thought. I just presented it to them. And several times we tried to have a committee for field trips, but that didn't work, because some people had the idea that this was a trip and it was not going to be something that people could do, And I would say, can we sort of table that for next week or next month? And after a while they said, well, I think he's, and I said, well, no, I'm not. I said, I have to look at it as, can people navigate? Can people get there? How far is it? Is a bathroom nearby? Can we have a restaurant to eat in, or do we need to brown bag it? And so I put all these things together, and a lot of the people were glad to have that lunch out, because they could sit with the people they just met. They could sit there and look in the back of their camera and show the pictures they had taken. Well, look, I took this one, I took it that way, and so on. And it was a way of sharing, and it just made me so happy to see all these people sharing and sharing and sharing. And that's why I just kept on doing it till I just ran out of strength. Got worn out.
So if you had some advice to give anybody now that's in the club, that hasn't had the opportunities to grow and mature and see how things work, again, any advice that you could give us to make our club better now?
Well, the thing is, if you can gradually learn something and then build on that, I mean, if you don't know how to use a digital camera, find out how and work with it and experiment and use it on a field trip. You may not have many pictures that you like, but at least you've gotten used to what all the buttons and gadgets are and so on. And of course, the digitals today with automatic just about can do a perfect picture. You know, you can tweak it a little bit if you go into Photoshop or some of these other programs, but they do such a good job. And when I came out, I was still a film guy, and so I had to learn digital. And so it was a good thing for me as well. And then I could share with others. They would come in, running in, oh, I can't do this. And I said, just push this button in here, and be sure to fix your cards, format your cards. You know, they buy a new card and just throw it in the camera. Well, it has to be formatted for that particular camera, or it's not going to take good pictures. It might take some pictures, but it might leave out some parts of the pictures. And then we had a program where we could bring back, if somebody had erased some pictures on their card, I could bring some of them back. I couldn't bring every single one of them back, but I could do several. And sometimes I got 400 out of 600 pictures back, and the people were just so excited about that. And then we put them back on a CD or something, and they could take it home and then make prints and or show people their pictures. And I had this one guy came to me, an older guy, and he had just forgotten about so much, and he had erased so much on his camera. And I said, well, I can't promise you anything, but I took it and ran it through this program. And then when I saw him a couple days later, I said, here's a CD. How much do I owe you? I said, nothing. It's my gift to you. I said, but these are the pictures I was able to save. And then about a week later, he came running up to me like a little kid, and he said, what did you do? I said, well, we have a program. Actually, we have two of them. And this one was the one I use more often because I can get more pictures saved. And then another cute story is we had a couple that got engaged and married. They're older couple, and they met in the camera club there, and they had each been married and divorced, and they were just like little kids holding hands, and they would be talking all the time in some of the lectures. So I went and talked to them one day. You know, I said, now you're interrupting and bothering other people when you chitter-chatter. I said, now, I don't want to call you out in class and embarrass you, but you've got to stop this, and then you can talk after the program. So they were so funny one day. They came running up to me just like little kids. We got married and we haven't told the kids yet.